Hi again then guys, and welcome to yet another installment of Beards and Cars. And for those who are maybe new to the channel or new to this series, this is a podcast style series where we go much more in depth into certain topics. So it might be a countdown, but we'll go more in depth into each layer of the countdown rather than just a bullet point list. And it allows for more of an in-depth, more open discussion. And of course, down in the comments as well, we will often have discussions back and forth, not just between me, but between you guys as well. Now, this one, as you saw from the thumbnail, and as you saw from the title, is more of a countdown-style episode, and it's, by definition, a very personal one. Because, of course, this countdown is my personal 10 favourite racing games ever. Of all of the ones I've played, of all of the ones I own, these are my 10 absolute favourites. And I am going to have a couple of honourable mentions as well, because they really do deserve just that, a mention. They're not quite incredible enough for me to put them on the list itself, but they do deserve to be mentioned. So, speaking of those honourable mentions, let's break those down first. Now, I have 3 honourable mentions in particular, and those are games which I really enjoyed and really loved and still have a lot of love for, but they just don't necessarily hold the same kind of importance for me, because most of the vehicles, or most of the games in fact, on this countdown are games which combine just being a really good game in general, one that you can go back to, and also the nostalgia. Something that I really enjoyed from back in the day, but it still holds up now. Whereas these 3 for me, they're put simply just not ones that I go back to all that often. So the first honourable mention is Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition Remix. I had a ton of fun with all of the variants of the Midnight Club 3 game. You got Dub Edition Remix, as the PSP edition as well, which is slightly different, and I love all of them. They're really good, they're really in-depth. The car selection is surprisingly good. There are actually some cars in the game which I've never seen in any other game. Stuff like the Gembala Ferrari F355. There are stuff in the game which you wouldn't expect to be there, like the Cadillac Cian, the Pagani Zonda, the Chrysler ME412, and even my favourite concept car of all time, the Cadillac 16. So there are some really cool vehicles. There's a great mix of cars and bikes as well. And often when we think of games that have cars and bikes, your mind will go to stuff like Project Gotham or Test Drive Unlimited, but actually Midnight Club 3 and also LA, but I don't enjoy LA as much, are great examples of that. You've got the custom choppers, sport bikes, naked bikes. It's a great selection. So that is definitely worthy of an honourable mention, and some of the earliest videos that I did on this channel are actually from Midnight Club 3, various glitches. The next honourable mention is a similar vein of arcade street racing, and that is Need for Speed Carbon. I am a big fan of the older Need for Speed games, especially the first one, which has a very special place for me as well. But Carbon to me was the pinnacle. It's the one that I enjoyed the most. I haven't liked any of them that much since then, and I didn't like Most Wanted that much. I know that's heresy to Need for Speed fans, but Carbon was the one for me. I love the fact that you could customise the bodywork to the point where you could actually change the size of certain things, not just the shape. That was really cool. I love the car selection. The police chases are fantastic. I just really enjoyed that game. The story is always convoluted in Need for Speed, but at least that one was kind of interesting. So, put simply, it's worth a mention. And the third and final one is one which you might not expect to be an honourable mention for me, because it's not a game that I talk about that much, and that is a PlayStation 1 game called Ducati World Racing. This is probably a game which a lot of you guys have never even heard of, let alone played, because of course the majority of my content is car related rather than bikes. This is not just bikes, but it's even more narrowed down to just Ducati. But the great thing is, they actually made a really good game. It's not just like, oh, here are your 12 Ducatis, 2 racetracks, and like 1 hour of fun. No, it's way more than that. It has an in-depth career mode, customizable rider gear, customizable bikes. You could change bodywork to like unpainted carbon fibre, swap out to lightweight wheel rims, upgrade exhausts. And the selection was fantastic. The music is retro and funky in that 90s style. The graphics actually hold up surprisingly well in that kind of charming Gran Turismo 2 sort of way. And it actually made me love one of my favourite vehicles of all time, as much as I do, the Ducati 748 SP, which is the yellow with white on the back. I still adore that bike mainly because of that game, and also finding out that it is indeed as good in real life as it is in the game. So again, definitely worthy of an honourable mention for me. The thing that holds it back from being in the full list, though, is that it doesn't have the replayability now that it used to for me. I simply don't go back to it that much. But now let's get into the actual top 10 countdown. Now, kicking us off first of all in 10th, and you will probably be surprised by this one, is Gran Turismo 6. Surprisingly low on the list. Some of you might not even put it on your personal list at all, because I know a lot of people actually did not like it. They thought that it was just a rehash of Gran Turismo 5. And consequently will have more of that connection to Gran Turismo 5. The funny thing with me though, and I have talked about this way back in this series, is that I never play racing games in the correct order. So for me, I actually played GT6 before GT5, and although I would admit freely that GT5 is a far better structured game, GT6 will always have a special place for me because not only is it, at least for now and probably for the foreseeable future, the largest amount of cars ever seen in any racing game, but Gran Turismo 6 will always have a very honourable place to me because it single-handedly got this channel going. Back in late 2013, after the game came out, I wasn't using this YouTube channel to do very much apart from upload Goodwood videos, and then I thought, you know what, I'm a fully qualified car mechanic, why not put some of that to good use to help out the community and get some views from it? So that's what I did, and I started the legacy of HSG top speed tunes in Gran Turismo 6, and look where we are now. So Gran Turismo 6 will always have a special place for me, and of course, we still put out videos for it even now. So, of course, it's worthy of a place. As far as beyond that, though, I don't love the game itself. It's mostly a feeling of nostalgia and just personal importance that guarantees it a place on the list. In terms of actual love, I think I actually love Ducati World probably more, but I've got to put GT6 on the list because it just deserves to be. Next up in 9th place, I'm putting my first foray into the Forza franchise, Forza Motorsport 2. This is, again, a game that I do still put out videos for each week, and it's a game that holds up really, really well, because although it's called Forza 2, which would indicate it came out ages and ages ago like Gran Turismo 2 did, of course that's not the case, because Forza started a lot later than Gran Turismo, around, 2005, I think, compared to 1997 for Gran Turismo. So Forza 2 is actually from like 2006, 2007, something like that, and it actually holds up really well. The graphics are surprisingly good for its age, the handling physics are really fun, the vehicle selection is not as big as Gran Turismo at the time, but very strong. Just look, for instance, at the amount of Ferraris, Maseratis, Lambos, various others in the game, and some of my favourite cars of the whole franchise were included therein, and I know for you Forza fans, there are definitely cars that you want to see brought back. For me, most notably the Seat Cupra GT, for many other people the Chrysler ME412. And there are a couple of others too. So, fantastic game, definitely worthy of a place here. Next up, in 8th, again, you might be surprised by how low on the list it is, but again, it does deserve a place for sure, and that is the Polyphony motorbike racing game, Tourist Trophy. I love Tourist Trophy. Now, the reason why it's not even higher on the list for me is basically the same as what I've said about a couple of the others, and that is, it doesn't have the same level of replay ability to me as some of the others. Tourist Trophy is not the kind of game that I go back and play all the time. It's as simple as that. It's the kind of game where I do plan to do content for it, once I can, as I've said a number of times, record PS2 footage in a good way, but the game itself is brilliant. I would still say that Tourist Trophy is hands down the best motorbike game ever made. I don't think Ride even comes close yet. We'll have to see about the third game. And of course the MotoGP games don't even barely qualify because it's just for racing pretty much, with barely any, if any, road bikes featured. So Tourist Trophy literally is the Gran Turismo 4 of bike games. And that's pretty brilliant. The bike selection is fantastic. There are bikes that you can't even see that you have to unlock in that very old school Gran Turismo way. There's tuning, there's the same track selection as Gran Turismo 4, which is really good, but with even more tracks, like Circuit Ricardo, or Valencia, whatever you want to call it, which a lot of people have been speculating was, I think, the new track coming out on GT Sport, but clearly not, because it looks nothing like that. And I love the game. It's definitely worthy of a place, of course. I have a lot of love for it. I really hope that we do get a Tourist Trophy too. And if we do, I mean, I think that's got a pretty good chance of being high on my list, if it, of course, turns out to be a good game. If it ever happens, that is. Next up in 7th, again, you might be surprised by how low I'm putting it, but Gran Turismo 2. Now, I know I've said in the past, and I have specifically said a number of times, that Gran Turismo 2 was my favourite Gran Turismo game. So either things have changed, or that doesn't bode well for Gran Turismo on this list. Well, don't worry, it is the former of the two. Because the reason why I've put it this comparatively low in 7th is because, yes, it was my first foray into the franchise, just like the second game of Forza was. But, unlike Forza 2, I personally found that going back to Gran Turismo 2 to make the videos that we still do for it, I did not find that it still has the same replayability. Now, for a lot of you guys, it does. I know that some of you specifically, such as some of my Patreon sponsors, you like to go back and play that game, and you've actually got into it recently. That's really cool, and there's a lot to love. I think the problem for me is, because I experienced pretty much everything that the game had to offer as a kid, I don't really get anything more out of it now. And unfortunately, going back, I find the career mode not really that enjoyable, and most of the nostalgic love that I have for the game is more so to do with just the cars rather than the actual game itself, because you got to admit, Gran Turismo 2 has one of the best lineups of cars of any racing game ever. The Renault Espace F1, the Lotus Elise GT1, the Jaguar XJR15, various others which have never or rarely ever been featured in other games. Gran Turismo, let alone any others. So it definitely deserves a place. I still have a lot of love for it from a nostalgic point of view, but I've just found that going back to it, I didn't enjoy the experience of just being in the game as much. I love the music. I'd still say it's got the best music of the franchise. I still adore the cars, but career mode, that kind of thing, I don't enjoy that quite as much. Next up, in 6th place, I'm putting a game which, again, like Ducati World, a lot of you guys probably haven't ever played, maybe never even heard of. It's known under a couple of different titles: Road Trip Adventure, Cora Q, I believe is another name in the Asian market, and it's basically a penny racers game with the very squat up, caricatured cartoon versions of cars. And it's a game which I actually specifically did not ever want to play, because back when I was a kid, my dad brought home a couple of racing games on the PlayStation 2. I had no interest in playing this game, because the cover and the art looked so childish. Why would I ever want to play this thing? But then he started to play it, and I watched him a couple of times, and I thought, actually, that looks really cool. So I played it myself, and it is really cool. Because I would say that Road Trip Adventure is for sure one of the most undervalued driving games. It's a cult classic, and those who love it, like myself, really do love it. I mean, I've put it in 6th on the list, so clearly I do love it. But if you're not familiar with it, basically you play a character rather than just driving a car, and the game is based around a story where the president wants to retire, and he'll give the presidency to whoever wins this World Tour Championship. The world map in the game is huge, actually larger than many other open world racing games. It eclipses the first two Forza Horizon games. It might be similar to the third one, but I've got a feeling it might be bigger than that. The cars themselves don't change that much. It tends to be more the parts that you fit to them. So for instance, you can see stuff in the game like Skylines and RX-7s, and even stuff like the Mazda 787B is included, which you probably wouldn't expect. But it's not actually the car that changes. You can just swap the body, like a toy. You can give them oversized wheels, jetpacks, wings to fly. It's an awesome game. It's got so much innocent charm to it, but at the same time, it's not a childish game. It looks childish, but it actually isn't. There's a lot of quests, things that you can unlock in dialogue. It's kind of like an RPG game to some degree, but with cars instead of people walking around like a medieval land. It's really cool. It's a really, really cool game. I would definitely recommend checking it out if you haven't. Just try it at least once. Give the game a chance. But definitely worthy of a high place. I have a ton of love for it, and the replay value is really good. So that is 6th. What about 5th? Well, 5th is another open world game, and one which I actually did a complete playthrough of in one video. It's like 2.5 hours long. It's not even monetized because of the music. I don't make a dime off of that video, so be sure to check it out if you're interested. But it is Driver San Francisco. This game is brilliant. I would say it's pretty much perfect for what it was trying to do. You can pick it up on the PS3, on the Xbox 360. Again, it has the rarer approach of having an actual story rather than just driving. And the story is really good. It's actually one of my favourite stories of any driving game. In fact, it might be my favourite, because it's not stupid. Usually, like the Need for Speed ones, they have cheesy acting, ridiculous storylines. They're basically Fast and Furious, but as a game, take down a bad guy by street racing, as if that makes any kind of sense. With Driver, it's not like that. If you've never played it, imagine a 70s cop show, but with the supernatural ability of being able to become any driver on the map and instantly drive their car, like Matrix God's Eye style, so that you can jump out of your car, float around in the air, and then just pick a car that you want to jump into, and you become that driver. That to me is awesome. And the carnage that you can have in the game, you can jackknife trucks across the road, you can become a police officer in his car and chase down street racers. It's a brilliant game. I cannot stress enough how good it is. The graphics hold up super well, the cars sound fantastic. You will be surprised actually how good the car selection is. You've even got stuff like Roof in the game, there's a Zonda Cinque in the game, a McLaren F1. It's a pretty great car selection, and you've even got the Aston Martin Signet, which of course we reviewed this week. I love to drive that car in the game as well, and all of the vehicles are real. It's not one of those games where your cars are real but the traffic is this weird blocky default looking thing. No, all of the traffic is real. Cadillac Escalades and Hummers and Peterbilt trucks, they're all real. It really does add to the immersion. The world is huge in San Francisco, the map. It's great. It's so much fun. You don't even need to play the missions. Just driving around the map and doing stuff is so fun. Play it if you haven't. Moving up now into my 4th place pick. This might surprise some of you Forza fans on the channel that I put it this low, if you will. It's actually not that low. It's still pretty high. But Forza Horizon 3. This is a game which I absolutely love. I did not know if I would love it or not when I first went into it, of course. You can't really know that with any game. And I don't know if I'm going to love the 4th one that's coming out soon either. The fact that it's set in my home country is cool enough, but at the same time, Australia was a pretty inspired choice. The choice of map, the way the map looks, the way it's laid out, the vehicles, the tuning. It's, again, like Driver, for what it's trying to do, I would say a perfect game. Sure, there are always things that you can say, I wish they did this, I wish they did that, but realistically, I'm happy with everything about Horizon 3. And to be honest, I did not expect to love it as much as I did, because I didn't enjoy the second game all that much. In fact, I played through it to the point of getting a Maserati MC12, and yet I don't remember a single race. That's not a good thing. Whereas the first game, Horizon 1, of course, I did not like that the first time I played it. I completed it in 2 days, and I felt like I'd been cheated out of the money for the game. But then when I went back and realised, well, actually, yes, you can complete it in 2 games, or in 2 days, but there's more to it than that. Collecting the cars, obviously the online aspect is really good. So just like how some people say that Gran Turismo Sport is about more than just career mode, that applies to Horizon 1 as well. But I don't adore Horizon 1. I do absolutely love Horizon 3 though. It's a brilliant game. Brilliant game. It's got tons of charm, great attitude, great atmosphere, great choices of vehicles. The DLC was pretty strong, so yeah, check it out if you haven't already. Next up in 3rd place, I'm putting one which I don't go back to all the time, although I do go back to it to review certain vehicles, but it's one which has the relatively rare position for me of having an incredible, strong amount of nostalgia, but very rarely does this happen, that if you go back and play it, it still lives up to that nostalgia. It looks gorgeous, it's got great sound design, great vehicles, and just one of the best open world maps ever, and that is, of course, Test Drive Unlimited. I know a lot of people back in the day some of the guys who I knew playing various games that I used to as well, like the Gran Turismo 4s and that kind of thing, they didn't like Test Drive that much. They found it to be too arcade-styled, a little bit too boxy, and yet, in a funny kind of way, I would say that Test Drive Unlimited 1 has actually aged a lot better than many other games of that time. You don't really hear people clamouring over Enthusia and Total Immersion Racing and the Le Mans games that much. They have their fans, I own those games, and I love certain things about them, but you don't hear the kind of fanfare about those games that Test Drive Unlimited gets. It's a cult classic. It's the kind of game which for quite a long time, in fact, I couldn't even find a copy of, because people who were buying it started to keep it, because the value started really rocketing on some copies of it, like the PS2 version. Not so much now, but also Test Drive Unlimited is one of the only games, in fact, pretty much the only game, that I've owned on every console you could get it on. PS2, PS3, PSP, I think you could get it on PS3, I can't recall now, Xbox 360, and PC. All of the versions of it I had. I don't really know why I chose to do that, but I did anyway. For a while, it was my favourite game. I liked it even more than Gran Turismo or Forza. I got that into it. Unfortunately, the reason why it's dropped to third on this list, and it could have been higher, was because you can no longer access any of the DLC. And to me, the wealth of cars that were added in those DLC packs took it from being a great game to a perfect game. Like an above and beyond game. Stuff like the Adonis, the CLK GTR, the Kawasaki ZX-12R, the Cadillac 16 concept, some of my favourite cars basically were included. It's still the only game I've ever seen to have the B Engineering Adonis. So for me, brilliant game, holds up really well, definitely worthy of third place. In second place, and spoiler alert, the highest place that a Forza game will achieve on this list, Forza Motorsport 4. To me, unarguably, the pinnacle of the franchise. Horizon 3 is fantastic, but it's a completely different experience. And to me, as much as I love Horizon 3, the vehicle selection and the layout of the game in Forza Motorsport 4 is perfect. The vehicle selection when the DLC could be accessed, and I feel sorry for those who can't get it anymore, was brilliant. Now, I already downloaded it, and many others did too, so we still have the DLC. And trust me, it's brilliant. The car selection is not just expansive, but it's the choices that they made. Because at the time, the cars that they included were not in other games. And nowadays, when you say stuff like Koenigsegg's, Hennessy Venom GTs, SSC Ultimate Aeros, Veyron Supersports, Mosler's, Gumperts, Ascaris, that doesn't sound that special anymore, because a lot of games have them. Even Gran Turismo is starting to catch up, Drive Club, Project Gotham, etc. But the reality is, when Forza 4 came out, not many, if any, of the other games around had those cars, and that is still of great importance. Plus, the fact that I can easily go back to Forza 4 and have a ton of fun, that speaks volumes. And for me, I will give you guys a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look into the making of my videos here when I say that clearly I have to go back and play older games to get the footage for me to review the cars. I don't enjoy doing that anywhere near as much with any of the other games as with Forza 4. I love going back to drive those cars and record the footage, whereas with other ones, like, to be honest, Project Gotham, Test Drive Unlimited, as much as I love the cars and I love the games, I don't really enjoy recording the footage that much. It's more of just a means to an end, like part of the job. Whereas with Forza 4, I thoroughly enjoy every minute of it. The cars are outstanding, the career mode is massive. I never completed the career mode on Forza 4, and I love it. It's a great game. The auction house was incredible, and it was that game that single-handedly crafted my style of gaming. It finally made me realise what kind of gamer I am. I'm a businessman. I'm not a racing driver. I tune cars, and I paint them, and I make huge amounts of money from other players buying my work. I don't win races. I'm not a Senna type. I'm more of a Jay Leno type. I'm a collector, earning that cash rather than being out on the track and setting lap times. And that's the way I like it. I would much rather be a guy who's behind the scenes collecting tons of cars rather than out in the spotlight being critiqued for every chicane that I miss. That suits me very well. But you all want to know, what's in first place? Well, some of you can probably guess by this point because we haven't talked about that many Gran Turismo games. We had GT6 in 10th, GT2 in 7th, so which one could it possibly be? Well, some of you probably will know because I personally think it's the greatest racing game of all time, especially for its time, and that's a very crucial point. And that is, of course, Gran Turismo 4. I love Gran Turismo 4. Now, to clarify, the order of this list doesn't necessarily mean that I will play this game in first place more than all of the others. That's not what it means at all. As I just said, Forza 4 is the one that I enjoy going back to the most. This is in terms of the overall experience and the overall package of how much I enjoyed it. And for me, especially when you factor in the time and the console that Gran Turismo 4 came out on, it is quite simply unparalleled. Because the Xbox 360, which Forza 4 was on, is a more powerful console in terms of its raw ability than a PS2. It's also more temperamental and far less reliable, but the point remains that Forza had the technical advantage. Plus it was a newer game, whereas Gran Turismo 4 came out, 2004, 2005, something like that. It's got 700 cars. It's actually over 700 at a time when nobody was doing that. I think Forza had like 300 or 400. Enthusia had a couple hundred as well. Gran Turismo was way ahead of the market, just like GT5 and 6 also were. But it was GT4 that almost laid the spiritual groundwork for what Gran Turismo 5 and 6 would become anyway. I mean, just look at us comparing the cars in Gran Turismo 6, the non-premiums, as we call them. We basically call them Gran Turismo 4 rips, because they look the same as they did back then, but just very lightly updated. That is the legacy that Gran Turismo 4 has. Polyphony themselves, and let's not get into laziness or whatever reasons, but for whatever reasons, Polyphony deemed the quality of content in Gran Turismo 4 was good enough for them to include them in GT5 and 6 with relatively minor updates. And as awful as it seems to do that in concept, you got to admit there are still plenty of premium cars that you can thoroughly enjoy in GT5 and 6. The Chaparral 2J, for instance, it's not a premium, but I still absolutely love it. The Auto Union Streamliner, a variety of others too. But for me, Gran Turismo 4, it literally ticks every single box. The soundtrack is incredible. The car list is fantastic. It was right on the cusp, literally right on the cusp, of when Gran Turismo started to move away from normal cars and more into speciality vehicles. And now you can see the results of that. There are very few normal cars in the game. Gran Turismo 5 and 6 still had a good selection, but you could see they started going more towards the Formula One, the Ferrari, the Lamborghini, the Maserati. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, I just like the fact that Gran Turismo 4 feels like it has more of a balance between the two. And in a funny kind of way, I almost prefer the lineup of prototypes in Gran Turismo 4 to 5 and 6. And I know that sounds weird, because there are a number of cars which were not in the game. There was no Peugeot 908, there was no Audi R10, there are a couple of others that weren't in there, but you still had such a strong core component and core lineup of vehicles that it was incredible. That game single-handedly introduced me to so many car companies that I had never heard of before. I'd never heard of Proto Motors. I'd never heard of Chaparral. I'd never heard of Callaway. So many others that I'd never even heard of, let alone loved. And now look at the love that I have for them. Plus the way the game is designed, the menu is by far the best of any Gran Turismo game as far as I'm concerned. It's the only one which genuinely looks like a world map, but the game has this euphoric feel. It looks euphoric, everything is glowing, almost like, spoiler alert, the Institute in Fallout 4. And the music is euphoric, the car selection is incredible, the tracks are fantastic, the career mode is... and this is a rare thing, and it's something not to be taken for granted, it's actually interesting. The career mode actually is interesting. It feels like it has some merit to it. It's not just repetitive races over and over again. And to be honest, I don't think Gran Turismo has ever captured that magic since. I think GT5 is great, but it feels more efficient and more technical. Gran Turismo 6 was cool in its own kind of way, and the simplified layout appealed to more users, and Gran Turismo Sport, of course, is much more specialised. To me, Gran Turismo 4 was the pinnacle of the old guard. Gran Turismo 5 is where the series shifted. Gran Turismo 4, it was everything that Gran Turismo 1, 2 and 3 were leading up to. And to me, it's the best racing game ever made, especially for its time, and considering how well the graphics still hold up, how fun it still is, how you can still use actual strategy to work your way through career mode without buying any cars for the most part, if you want to. But if you want to, you can become a crazy collector, you can get cheat discs and do crazy things in the game, which I did. There's so much fun to be had. It's a game which is not just about 1 or 2 days of fun and then put it down. It's a fully immersive experience with actual 24-hour races. It was the first time Gran Turismo genuinely had that. It's perfect. For its time, it's perfect. And I believe that if they did a HD remake of that game now, which is not going to happen, but if they did, I think that would be probably my new favourite game, because it would take everything that was great about that one and just update all of the stuff that doesn't hold up quite as well, like the details, the sounds, the physics. But overall, yeah, Gran Turismo 4 is my favourite racing game of all time. So, I'd love to hear your top 10 down below, maybe with a couple of honourable mentions if you want to. I know there's some Enthusia love, some GTR love, TOCA love, that kind of thing, and also rally games, of course. I was very mixed about including the WRC games on the list, which I have a huge amount of love for, but overall, I don't have the same kind of love for those games. But overall, that's it for this pick. I'll, of course, see you guys next week, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.